Welcome,
Yes, Safiya.
Safiya. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, everyone.
So I'm just going to spotlight the two of us. Okay, welcome, Safiya. Um, I'm just going to read a bio first, and then we'll get into some questions. We've got about 60 people on the call. And if people want to, they can ask questions live by raising your hand, or they can type it in the chat to everyone, or they can type it in the chat to me directly. And we've got some questions already prepared. Okay, so Safiya Sinclair was born and raised in Montego Bay, Jamaica. She is the author of the memoir How to Say Babylon, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award, a finalist for the Women's Prize in Nonfiction, the OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, and the Kirkus Prize. How to Say Babylon was one of the New York Times 100 Notable Books of the Year, a Washington Post Top 100 Book of 2023, a Time Magazine Top 10 Nonfiction Book of 2023, one of the Atlantic's 10 Best Books of 2023, a Read with Jenna/Today Show Book Club pick, and one of President Barack Obama's favorite books of 2023. How to Say Babylon was also named a Best Book of the Year by The New Yorker, NPR, The Guardian, the Los Angeles Times, Vulture, and Harper's Bazaar, among others, and was an ALA Notable Book of the Year. The audiobook was named a Best Audiobook of the Year by AudioFile magazine. Safiya is also the author of the poetry collection Cannibal, winner of a Whiting Award, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Addison Metcalf Award in Literature, the OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Poetry, and the Prairie Schooner Book Prize in Poetry. Safiya's other honors include Guggenheim Fellowship and fellowships from the Poetry Foundation, the Civitella Rainier Foundation, the Elizabeth George Foundation, McDowell, Yaddo, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. She is currently an associate professor of creative writing at Arizona State University. That's a lot of awards. It's so great to read all of those, and you must be so excited.
So not necessary to read all of that, but thank you.
That was what we were given from the publisher. So
Thank
this was our November book for the gloss,
you.
and I just finished our virtual book club, which just happened literally finished a half an hour ago, and
Okay,
our group really loved it. We rated it a 4.5 out of 5, so it was really exciting. So I'm going to start with some questions that we already have, and then, as I said, people can send in questions or raise their hand and ask them live. And we are recording this, so this will be posted on the website and on the Gloss's YouTube channel. So the first one, your memoir is titled How to Say Babylon, a phrase that seems both linguistic and metaphorical. Can you unpack for our audience what Babylon represents in your personal mythology and creative landscape?
sure. I mean, I wouldn't say it's personal mythology. Babylon actually means something in the Rastafari culture, movement, and language. For the Rastafari, Babylon represents everything that they find to be oppressive to the Rastafari movement, to Black people, anything that's sort of connected to um, any state or government or oppressive system that seeks to oppress the Rasta community, anything connected to Western ideology, to colonialism, imperialism, slavery, what my father calls ism and schism. That is Babylon, everything that sort of they find is encroaching in, the sort of stifling and evil way is seen as Babylon.
And so, can you talk about how, what do you take away from that, and how does Babylon fit into your current life or the concept of it?
I mean, I take nothing away from it now. It defined my life so much when I was growing
Mm,
up, so much of, how my siblings were taught to walk through the world was to be wary of Babylon, to make sure we protected ourselves from the temptations of Babylon. My father, as you know, since you've read the book, became increasingly more and more obsessed with this idea of Babylon being something ruinous, and particularly ruinous to women, to his daughters. The Rastafari, I think some of them, but my father, let's say, I think felt that we were more susceptible to this idea of ruin of Babylon. And so he was extremely protective with the way that he wanted us to go out in the world. And this manifested in how we were supposed to dress. And,
right,
we weren't really allowed to have friends or, we had to cover our knees, cover our hair, all of this. So that really, this idea of Babylon, I spent most of my life learning what it meant when you said it, all the different ways it manifested in the world um, according to Rasta ideology, and watching it eventually come to mean me. So the book itself is sort of my own education and not only what it means when you say Babylon, how to say Babylon, and eventually coming to terms with myself being this part of Babylon as my father saw it. Of course, I don't
right.
think I am, and I think at the end of the book, I was trying to ask myself these questions of when I got to the US, and particularly when I lived in the South. I lived in Virginia and I encountered all of these things that I found connected to a lot of what my father was talking about, oppressive systems.
Right.
Seeing that up close firsthand, I then had to renegotiate this idea of Babylon and wonder, is it here? You know?
Mm,
So
right,
I think my only kind of connection out to Babylon is to say I live in Babylon here in America.
right,
Yeah.
right. I'm going to take some of the questions from the chat as well, kind of interspersed into the questions I have as well. So one of the questions is, how has your family responded? Oops, somebody else wrote a question here, so I went. How has your family responded to the very personal details in this book?
I think this is the most common question that I get.
Oh, okay.
And I always feel bad because I think I don't have the answer that people want. Is in fact, I, I think everyone in my family, particularly my siblings, they process our history and our past and our childhood in different ways than I do, right? My way of processing just happens to be writing a book about it to work through some of the things that happened. But for some of my siblings, particularly my middle sister Ife, she told me when she read the first couple chapters of the book, she said, I'm not ready.
Mm,
She said it
right.
was too close to her own memories and exactly how she remembered it, and she wasn't ready to go back there. And so similarly for my mom, she's read parts of it and she likes to joke like, why do I need to read it? Because I already know the story.
I lived it.
know? Um, but I will tell you that all of my siblings' partners read the book almost immediately.
Oh, oh,
I
interesting.
think, hoping it was some kind of primer, I think, for
Right.
understanding. Um, and for a long time, I didn't know if my father had finished the book because he's the only one actually who asked if he could read it. And I said,
Oh,
"Sure,
wow.
I think you should read it before the world does." Uh,
Right.
and I told him, I think it'll be hard for you to read. It was harder for me to live. But I said, just read it to the end. Um, And for a long time, he never said anything. So I didn't know if he'd finished it. And just a month ago, I just asked him, like, did you finish? And he said, yes, I did.
Oh,
Um, so, I think my family, everyone, yeah, everyone will be on their own journey
yeah,
to the book. But they're used to me kind of sharing about our lives with my poetry and my work before the memoir. And when I was writing the book, I consulted them every step of the way. So it wasn't like it was a big surprise or I said things
right.
that, I cross-checked my memories with my siblings. So a lot of what's in here is not just my memories, it's actually a collective weaving of our memories because I wanted them to feel themselves there and feel the love I have for them there whenever they made their way to the pages.
Yeah, it's a personal journey for each of them,
Yeah, absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the symbolism of the sea.
Yeah.
So the sea appears as a significant motif in your memoir. What does it symbolize for you in terms of freedom and rebellion?
I mean, you just said it exactly that, right? The sea for me, being born by the sea, um, again, it shaped so much of how I think about home, how I think about sort of the happiest days of my childhood, thinking about the sea, how it's connected to my mother and my mother's family. That's really when I say home, that's what I think of, the sea and our seaside village. Um, and so for me, the sea is really important to all of my writing, and I think a lot about the rhythm of the sea and the waves. And in the book, I talk about my mom teaching me how to read the waves, almost in the same way she taught me how to read poetry. That there are
Right.
in the movements of the sea a kind of heartbeat that I want to feel in the way I'm constructing the sentences and constructing. Um, the movements and the music of the language is very much tied to the sea. Absolutely. And yes,
Yeah,
it
I
does
really liked
represent,
that it was woven in.
yeah, it does represent this idea of freedom, um, of the sort of wide expanse of the sea being a place of possibilities, right? Of endless possibilities. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very happy to be a sea child.
Yeah, in the book, like wherever you lived, you were always looking to where the sea was in
Yeah.
relation to where you were.
Yeah,
I
it's my
really like that
anchor always, it's or I think compass is a better analogy.
compass.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next question we have is reflecting on the process of writing about personal trauma, what insights have you gained through this process about healing and forgiveness?
Um, Forgiveness was a big one for me, but it was also a surprising thing. Um, because I always say before I wrote this book, I would have never classified myself as a forgiving person.
Hmm.
And one of the most surprising things that came out of writing the book, the way that I wanted to write it, right? Not because I started to write this book actually 10 years ago, um, just as I left home in this really harrowing way, that's described in the book, this sort of penultimate chapter where I really felt that things between my father were irrevocably broken. And I felt that whenever I returned home to Jamaica, it would never be his home again, right? I would never return to where he lived and call that my home. And so there
Right.
was a lot of this um, in my leaving that I think was, it weighed on me, it wounded me. And I tried to write the book, about a year after that. And as I described in the book, it was really too hard because I didn't want to write the book from a wound. And it was my
Mm.
hope that when I felt that I was ready to write the book, um, that it wouldn't come from a place of hurt or anger.
Right.
Um,
That would have
and
been maybe a different book.
it would have been an entirely different book.
Yeah.
And it's not the one I wanted to leave in the world
Mm.
or to leave to my nieces. And so, um, in the process of writing it, I was just saying to you how I consulted with my siblings when I was writing the book. I also consulted my parents, right? Because there is a
Right.
chapter in there that's about their youth and their lives and how they came to Rastafari. And it was important for me to write that because there's no way to tell my story and my connection to Rastafari without telling their story and how they
Totally.
came to Rastafari. And so I really had to record a lot of conversations with both my parents and my
Mm,
father. We had a lot of conversations where he told me these things and I didn't know many of them.
right.
And it was the first time he told them to me, and he told them to me in a way that it wasn't told in anger, it wasn't told from a
Right.
place, we were just talking about what happened. And there were times where he would relay some of the things of his youth, that section, that scene where his mother leaves him homeless on the street. Is
Very
one of the
powerful.
times where I remember him telling this to me, and his voice broke and he started weeping as he was telling it to me. And I, at that moment, realized how much he was still carrying, how much hurt, how much pain, trauma from his own childhood he was carrying. And I really began to see him in a different way,
Hmm.
and I never wanted him to be presented in the book as 100% villainized. I wanted to tell the truth, but I wanted to know if there was any nuance in it. And of course, every human being, or most, have some sort of nuance to them. And in writing the book and talking to my father about this, I started to come to this place of not only a nuanced understanding of him as his daughter, but also um, a place of forgiveness that came from this understanding, and that surprised me in writing the book. And in many ways, it really was, for me, it was a journey I needed to be on. I needed to feel for myself. The forgiveness was less about him or for him. It was more about me trying to work through a lot of these things that happen and coming to that place. Um, it made me feel like I could release a lot of that trauma in a really cathartic way. I could leave it there, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Like it's hard carrying that anger around as
Yeah.
well, right? And
Yeah.
you wrote the book at a time when it was right for you to write it. And we
Yeah.
appreciate you writing it. So
Thanks.
you already did answer. One person had written in the chat, have you forgiven your father? So you've already, I think, answered that question.
I hope the book also answered that question.
I felt it did. Yeah, I felt it did. Okay, so we'll go to a few questions in the chat here. Okay. I don't know if this question is actually related to my first question when I was asking you about Babylon. Can you speak to intersectionality in your own life? You talk about your experience and siblings' experience as being different. Can you speak more about this?
Um, yes, I mean, as I wrote in the book, we were, because the Rastafari have this very fraught history in Jamaica, which is something I think many people outside of Jamaica might not have known, that the Rastafari actually persecuted minority historically in Jamaica, that many Rastafari are not really allowed to have, they're not allowed to have jobs. They were kicked out of their homes, like my father was. In Montego Bay, they were for a time forbidden from walking along the beach sites that were being developed for hotels. Um, and
Wow.
so this is part of the reason that the Rastafari kind of became reclusive and saw this sort of outside world as Babylon because they were so attacked and they faced so much struggle and strife. And my siblings and I mean, that sort of trickled down to us. We also felt it. We were among the first Rasta children actually to integrate public schools in Jamaica.
Right.
Um, yeah, we before that, Rasta children actually weren't allowed to be in school, and even now, um, recently there have been stories in the Jamaican papers about, there was a young girl that went to school. She had dreadlocks, and the principal cut her dreadlocks off without telling her parents. She went back home and she had no hair.
Wow.
And they sued and it went to the high courts. Um,
Oh, wow.
and a law just got repealed in Jamaica this year, this summer, that Rasta boys can now go to school without their head being covered. Before, the rule was okay, they can go to school, but they have to cover their head. So this isn't even something that was like many decades ago. This is still something sort of ongoing.
Right.
And so my siblings and I also faced a lot of this sort of being ostracized, not just by our peers or by children, because everybody, every school kind of has this dynamic of children being picked on or whatever. But our teachers also, I think, treated us differently because we were Rastafari. And so this is something we faced every day. And I think it brought me and my siblings closer because everywhere we went, we were the only Rasta children. If we went to
Right.
the beach, we were the only Rasta children. If we went to the supermarket, we were the only Rasta children. And so, yeah, it was quite an interesting way to grow up feeling like an oddity, really,
Right.
everywhere that we went.
Totally.
Yeah.
So someone does have their hand up and wants to ask a question live. Shalene, is that how I pronounce your name?
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
I'm going to add you to the
Um,
spotlight so that we can have you ask your question.
Thank you so much. And Safia, just wonderful book. I mean, there's just so much about, I grew up in Antigua, so a lot of this really resonates with me. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about halfway through the book, there is that scene where your mom bought you some sneakers and you didn't like them. And as a teenager, you expressed your dislike for them, and your father reacted. Um, and then started hitting you with the belt, and when you tried to run away, your mom pushed you back into him. And I thought it was really interesting that you chose to include that specific scene, but also how you talked about how you felt about it and how it was going to take a lifetime to kind of come back to. I wonder, now that it's been a little while since you've written the book, have your feelings about that moment in time changed?
Um, sorry. Um, I think I said it best on the page. I said, I don't know why it happened. I said, it haunts me still, and I don't have the answers. And I think I just want to leave it there, you know? There is no answer I have to give. Yeah.
Was there anything else you want to ask?
Thank you. Not so much an ask, but just a moment of profound clarity that came for me was when you were walking with your mom in the museum, and you said you were walking with, like, you worded it a very specific way of like the naivete of a 40-year-old mom. And it just kind of clicked for me that, like, my mother is 75, and there are questions that she'll ask me, and I kind of like how you reacted. I'm like, oh, you should know this. But when I read that section of your book, I literally paused and had to call my mother and be like, I get it now. Like, I understand. I'm in a very different place than you were. You grew up in a small town in Antigua. Like, I'm seeing so much more. And when I talk about it, I speak as if everyone has experienced this, but she's never seen certain things. So, if nothing else, I want to thank you for opening my eyes to that.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Still, I'm trying, I have tried very much to be a patient person. I can't say I always was. I can't say that that was how I was raised. And so it's something that I had to be very intentional about, especially with my mom, because I don't want to re-trigger her with me being so exacting about what I think she should do, how she should be. And there were times when I was younger where I couldn't see it. When I was writing the book, I saw, oh, me being this way actually is re-triggering her, And so I've really come a long way with like being very patient and understanding with her, and she grew up in a different way and a different time. Yeah. and she's
Thank you.
slowly learning. I mean, she was here, she was just with me. She left yesterday, and just before she left, she said, um, she's still learning from me.
Oh,
She's
oh,
like,
nice.
I'm learning to speak up for myself. I'm still learning. It was just like this small thing, like we were at a restaurant, they brought us wine and the wine wasn't cold enough. And I said, hey, I want it colder. And she's like, I would never do that. And she's like, but I saw you did it, and then they brought you the cold wine that you wanted. And she's like, I'm learning that I should ask for the things I want. I'm like, yes, mom. If you're paying your money at the restaurant, they better bring the wine cold. And but it was also a lesson to me, even just yesterday, that she was like, I'm learning day by day to speak up and use my voice and ask for the things that I want.
That's a nice story. Thank you. Okay, another question in the chat is about the color green. I noticed that the color green is prevalent on your website, on your memoir's author photo. Does the color hold a special significance for you?
Yeah, I mean, the Jamaican flag is heavily green, green and yellow. Those are our colors. The green in the flag signifies the landscape of Jamaica. And if you've read the book, you know I'm deeply connected to the landscape. I'm deeply connected to the flora of Jamaica. And so yeah, when I wear green, it's really a tribute to Jamaica and the place I'm from, and thinking about the landscape that made me. And it's fun, I was like, my whole tour was green before Wicked came out, okay? I had my style, I styled the tour, everything green, okay? It's
Nice.
also as a way to sort of have fun with it. Um, so yeah.
There was a question about the audiobook, in terms of why you decided to be the narrator versus getting somebody else to do it.
I didn't decide. My publisher asked me.
Oh,
They said, they asked me, they said, we can't imagine anybody else narrating the book or recording the audiobook. Do you think you're up to doing it? And I said, sure. Yes, I'll do it. Because I was like, yes, it makes sense. This is my family. This is my story. It should be in my voice. And then I got into the booth. And I think it was like the second chapter or something. I realized that I had to speak dialogue in the voices of my parents. And I was
mm,
like, okay, this is another level that I had not prepared myself for.
I hadn't
And so
anticipated.
I had not anticipated how difficult it would be, that I wanted it to be a sort of interesting listening experience. So part of that meant I had to, as best I could, remove myself from some of the I had to really say, okay, I'm going to capture my mom's voice, I'm going to capture my dad's voice. But this scene is my dad saying something really mean to me, and I'm saying it in his voice to myself. I mean, it was like another level of therapy I needed when I was done. And I recorded for like 7 hours a day for
Wow.
almost 2 weeks. So I spent a whole day in the booth, and then I would just go home and I had nothing left. Um, so it really was the most difficult thing I've ever done. But I hope that, the audiobook sort of conveys the story in the way that I was hoping, and so it was worth it.
Yeah, there's quite a few comments in the chat about the audiobook. I listened to the audiobook and I read. I did a combination, and I thought you narrated it so well.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the narration of it. So people are saying I truly enjoyed the audiobook. It was a beautiful reading. Having listened to the audiobook, your narration made the most amazing difference. It was everything. Yeah, so a lot of people are commenting on the audiobook that read it.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. Um, so another question we have here is many readers in our community may not know much about Rastafarianism. What misconceptions do you hope this book clears up?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the Rastafari don't use the word Rastafarianism because they don't believe in ism and schism.
Oh, right. Yes.
So the
First
Rastafari,
mistake.
yeah, the Rastafari dialect, right, is there, the way that my father speaks in the book is specifically Rastas speak this way because they are rebelling against the English language, right? They're rebelling against empire and the empirical language. And so they don't, they don't say ism. That's Babylon's word.
Right.
I would say, yeah, um, some of the things I wanted to sort of re-narrativize um, and broaden the perspectives on in Rastafari, some of the things I talked about earlier is um, explaining more about Rastafari history and the way it intersects with Jamaican history and Jamaican culture, right? Because so many people kind of think of Rastafari as the thing that defines Jamaica. Most people might think everybody in Jamaica is a Rasta, and that is not so, right? Jamaica is a predominantly Christian country. In fact, we have like the most churches per capita of any place in the world.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, so it's a serious level. Like you throw a stone, you hit a church in Jamaica. And so,
Interesting.
I wanted to write about Rastafari history. I wanted to write about the founding of Rastafari. I think most people kind of know of it tangentially through Bob Marley, and that's kind of
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Or most people think dreadlocks are just a hairstyle. For the Rastafari, it's not a hairstyle, right? It's all part of the sort of it's for the Rastafari, dreadlocks is a sacred marker of your devotion and your reverence to Rastafari. And I think most particularly, I wanted to write about Rasta women because I think, again, when most people think of Rastafari, they think of it as a sort of male-centered thing, right? When they think of Rastafari, I think most people think of a man. And most people wouldn't know what a Rasta woman's life is like or a young Rasta girl's life is like. And so I really wanted to really write about that and expand on or give a portrait of Rasta girlhood or Rasta womanhood as I lived it. And that was important to me.
Yeah, in our book club, people felt like it was very educational, and they didn't know how the women were treated or how they grew up, and so it was, yeah, good knowledge for us, definitely. Um, so a question just came in. You mentioned silver throughout the book. Your poem Silver attributes silver as being liberating, joyful, and empowering. Was this your intention?
Well, yes. The poet is very intentional, honey.
Yeah.
You know, as you know, Silver, the poem, was a very important turning point in my life.
Yep.
Um, because and for me, and so for me, Silver represents not just my poetry, not just that specific poem, but it represents the moment where I kind of found my voice. I found my voice on the page, and I realized that what I had to say, not only that I had something to say, but that what I had to say was important and that I should say it. And so for a long time before that, I kind of grew up, as you know, in a household where my voice was very stifled and I wasn't, whatever I thought was supposed to be what my father believed. And I wasn't really allowed to expand on that or use my voice in the ways that I wanted. Or to speak about the things I believed or the things I was feeling. And so poetry for me represented that turning point of actually coming into my voice, um, and finding that sort of bravery to keep speaking and keep saying what it is I thought I should say. And so silver really represents that. So it is
Nice.
quite important. And so I'm also happy if you have the hardcover. I think also it's in the paperback, the actual,
Well, yeah, I've got this one.
yeah. So the poem Silver is actually in the book. Um, and
I'm
so
glad you included it.
yeah, I'm really happy too that my publisher happily wanted it to be in the book. And in the hardcover, it's included in the end pages of the book with like a design I made. And so
Yeah,
um
I have it here.
yeah, exactly. And so I was happy that we included that because it's something that I, spoke about and its importance in the book. So I was happy for readers to have the chance to actually see the poem itself, which is, juvenilia written at 15, 16.
You wouldn't know. It was referenced, quite a bit in the book, and so it was like a little Easter egg to me at the end, having the poem,
Yeah.
because I was like, do I need to look it up? How do I find this poem? And then it being included in the book was amazing. So I know you've listed some other books in there, but somebody is asking, are there any other books that you would recommend for additional reading about this, about the culture?
Part of one of the things I found most challenging about writing the book is that Rasta culture is really an oral culture, right? So for the Rastafari, they don't have a sort of biblical equivalent. They don't have a holy
Mm,
book that they turn to or, that they take their tenets from. Um, a lot of it is just oral wisdom passed down from brethren to brethren. And then the Rasta brethren, who's head of the household, kind of takes and interprets these sort of tenets the way that he wants them. And so a lot of the time there was no source for me to check or cross-check in writing the book. I really just had to go back to my father, my brother, other Rasta brethren, and ask them, well, how would you spell this word in Rasta dialect? Or what are the main sects and how would you define them? And, things like this, I really just had to ask them because, of course, the circle of wisdom, women weren't really invited into. And so I always say I invited myself into the circle of wisdom in writing the book because I wanted to get it right. Um, and it's hard to do that when there's no like one source and the Rastafari, they are anti-establishment, so they're not exactly um, forthcoming to
right.
sociologists. They don't even speak to the census takers. Because
Oh,
people always
interesting.
ask me, like, well, how many Rastafari are there? It's like a rough estimate. It's like
Right.
100,000 to 300,000 because Rasta don't talk to census taker. So how,
Right.
so a lot of it really was just having to ask my father, my brother, and other brethren. And then I cite the other sources actually in the book. There's one book called The Rastafarians that was written many decades ago by a white sociologist. And so a lot of the things that are said in there, some Rastas would dispute and so on.
Mm.
And then the chapter where Haile Selassie comes to Jamaica, that I had to watch archival footage of his arrival to the airport. I read like Life magazine. I read the old Jamaican newspaper reels of his arrival in the 60s to kind of put that scene back together exactly as it happened. Yeah,
Which you did very well.
thank you. And I'll tell you a story. I did an event in London in Brixton. I did a book launch, my UK book launch, and there was an older woman in the audience. And at the end, she stood up and she said, I was there when Haile
Oh,
Selassie came in 66. I was a young girl on my
oh
uncle's
wow.
shoulders, and when I read your book is exactly how I remembered it. I said, "Oh,
Oh,
phew,
that's
thank
so amazing to
you,
hear
thank
that.
you." So that's one of the most memorable things that happened on book tour because I was like, "Wow, I'm so grateful."
And how else would you have met someone that experienced it,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So that is definitely that's amazing. Um, so one of the things that we talked about in our book club was in the language, as how they use the word I. when it refers
Yeah.
to themselves, refers to, and so can you talk a little bit about that? Because we found it a little, some of us found it a bit confusing reading it because it's used to talk about yourself, talk about other people as well.
Yeah. I think for the Rastafari, they intend for people who aren't Rastas to find it confusing.
Oh, okay, that's intentional.
It's intentionally to sort of keep out those who aren't
Right.
Rastas. You're supposed to understand the language in your spirit and your soul. Yeah, so for the Rastafari, they say I and I. They never just say I. They say I and I, or they say I man, or they say the I. And so the idea is that um, it's never an individual because they think it's Rastafari doesn't come from an individual spirit. It comes from a collective one because
Mm,
Jah is always with the Rasta man. And so when they say I and I, it means the Rasta man and Jah. And
mm,
so that's sort
okay.
of how, and trust me, I had to ask my father too. Can you imagine, can you etymologically break this down for me?
Yeah.
Rasta don't deal with etymology, you know? So it's
Right.
like, um, yeah, but the idea is that, you know, the Rasta brethren is never an individual spirit, is a collective
Okay.
spirit that Jah always walks with the Rasta man. And so that's why they speak with
Oh,
this.
that yeah, thank you for clarifying that because we were discussing that in our book club.
Yeah,
Um, some other questions in the chat here. Did the situation with the old poet make you at any point want to stop writing poetry?
never.
Okay.
You know, he didn't give me poetry. Poetry came before him. And so poetry, I was thankful I had it because it's always been my best way to make sense of the world and make sense of my place in the world and make sense of whatever I was feeling or whatever I was experiencing, you know, that
Yeah.
I was always happy to have poetry to be able to sort of distill it down into its like essential emotion on the page. So yes.
So another question is, as a professor, how do your students react to reading about intimate details about your personal life? Has that come up?
Well, I don't know. I haven't taught them since the book came out because I've been on book
Oh,
tour
right.
for the last year.
Oh, okay. So you haven't gone back to the
I've
craft.
been on break. Yeah. I
Yeah,
guess
because
I'll
the book came out in
know
October, right? A year ago?
a year ago and I've been on tour. I'm still on, yeah, I'm still traveling now. So,
How many more months of it do you have?
well, I told my team I need a break, so I mid-November I said that's it. And so I'm giving myself a break.
Good. A well-deserved one.
Yeah. I will teach in the spring though, so we'll see. But I teach
Okay.
grad students. I don't think, you know, I don't think they will, I don't think it's unusual to have a professor who, I mean, poets write about
Right.
their lives all the time, so and so do the students. And so we kind of understand that in our workshop, our poetry workshop, it's a safe space. It's I call it a sacred space where we come in and we share so much of ourselves. Uh,
Right.
so in many ways, it's good that they too can read. They too can see me being vulnerable on the page.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. So one question is, you speak of your nieces with great fondness. Will you tell or share your experiences about your grandfather with them? I mean, eventually they may end up reading the book, but what will you share?
Well, I wrote the book for them.
Oh,
So
it's for your nieces. Oh yeah,
yes,
you actually say that in the book.
I literally say that.
You do.
And I literally say that in my dedication. So yeah, it's for them to sort of know, you know, where they came from and um who the women were who made them. And also the book itself is written in this hopeful way that whatever comes next for them won't be what happened in the past, that they will be able to forge for themselves their own futures without restriction, which is what is happening now. And so I'm already thrilled that, you know, a cycle has been broken.
Totally. How many nieces do you have?
I have two.
So one is your brother's.
Yes, and my sister Ife
Yeah.
had her first a year ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that was after the book was probably published
Hmm.
or after you wrote it.
Yes. My mom swears I conjured my niece to come
Ah,
because
probably.
in the dedication I say, for she who is yet to come. My
Right.
mom's like, see that you called her here, you called her to us.
You manifested it. I do believe in that kind of stuff. I do. Do you?
Yeah. I do, but I think my mom really believes it. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see who you dedicate your next book to and what you manifest.
Oh, I have to be very careful then.
Yes. You have to be very intentional.
Very intentional, which I always am.
Yes, you are. And we can see that in your writing.
Thank
Um, so a question I have also here is what was the most surprising emotional discovery you made about yourself during your
you.
writing process?
I think it's what I already talked about, is this coming to this place of sort of forgiveness. Um, you know, I didn't always know how the book was going to end.
Mm.
Uh,
So how did that come about?
I mean, literally as I described it, right? I went to give this reading in Jamaica, and I read that poem to my father, and I said, I really just want you to hear me. And I think a large part of writing this book too is just wanting him to understand what I was going through all of those years and just having him take it in. Um, and I didn't know how it was gonna go when I read
Yeah,
the poem, as you know, he has a temper and so on. And so I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Um, but I read the poem, and then I came off the stage, and he was the first one there, hugged me, and he said, I'm listening and I hear you. And literally my mind, I felt this sense of relief, release. And I thought, if this were a book, this is where I would end it.
oh,
I said, we can end it here. And even if it never, even if, this moment doesn't hold, this is where I would end it. Um, and so, yeah, it was surprising to me, um, because it hadn't happened. It was this new moment
right,
between me and my father, of understanding, of him being a sort of gentler man, him being willing to listen, him being, you know, um, I think a little bit humbled by who his daughters grew up to be.
right.
It's not, and I think he says something like that in the last chapter to me, where he says, I worried so much about you and your sisters, and I realize now I probably didn't have to worry as much
And
as
he didn't know that, right?
he didn't know. So yeah, that was the most surprising thing that happened in my life, but also when I sat down to write the book, was finding myself, I don't know, softening to him, feeling him become more humanized to me in a way that he never did. He never humanized himself to us. I think he
Right,
wanted to be seen, um, as larger than life, as like, my word is law. Um,
right.
and so seeing him that way and having to get inside his head and understand him and think about his hurts and pains brought me to a place I never expected. And
Mhm.
yeah, brought me to this space of being more understanding and more forgiving of him, in a way that I think not even my other siblings are.
Right.
Yeah,
All of you are probably at different places with that, right?
exactly. Which is,
Yeah,
it's an interesting thing, in a family.
definitely.
Yeah.
I really liked how you ended the book. And I'm sure, like you were saying, you may not have when you were writing it knew at the time when you started it, like, where is this going to end? What's
Yeah.
the ending going to be? And then a moment came to you where you knew definitively
Yeah.
that this is where the book needs to end. And
Yeah.
I thought it was like a perfect place for it to end. I really liked that. Because we're all wondering as we're reading it, like, what's going to happen with your relationship with your father? Like, where is it going to end? A lot of people are wondering that as they're reading it.
Yeah. I
So,
was wondering it as I was living
yeah,
it. It's
for
like,
sure.
you know,
You were living it.
or there were times where I thought this is done. I thought the book was closed, you know, in my
Oh,
life.
interesting, right?
Um, and I think the original ending was actually the penultimate chapter, you know, after he you know, attacks me and I leave home.
Oh, you
For
thought that was going to be the initial
for a
ending.
long time I thought
Oh,
that's where it ends, you know. But life surprises you.
it does.
Yeah.
Totally. So one of the questions is there anything in the book that you initially wanted to include, but then you didn't end up including it?
Um, yes, there was a chapter on my grandmother, actually both my grandmothers, but particularly my mother's mother who lived by the seaside. Um, she was there in the earlier chapters, and that eventually got cut. But um it was important. There was a longer story to it, you know. This moment where I walk into the sea and I say, I hear a voice calling me, I see a person out on the waves.
Right.
Um, yeah, there was a reason that I'd included my grandmother, whose face I'd never seen. We didn't have a picture of her. My
Oh,
mother didn't know what she looked like because she died when my mother was 4. Um, and then when I was about 18 or 19, my auntie and I we heard there was one picture of her in Jamaica in existence, and we like went on this hunt
oh,
for her picture and we found it.
oh, amazing.
And it was the woman that I saw in the water
Oh, wow.
and yeah, but that
That's really amazing.
So that was something, but it was sort of a longer story. And then in the
Right,
middle of the book, I would tell the story of going to find the picture and so on. And, you know, my editors thought let's streamline. So
right.
that was one of the things that, you know,
You
was
took out.
there in the beginning of the book and sort of the book came
Right,
um, out of this love for my grandmother who I never met, but
right.
somehow when I was 4, thought I saw her there in the
Wow.
sea. Yeah.
Um, we're coming up to the hour. I want to ask you what's next for you. I did watch an interview, and I think you had said something about you were going to write some Rasta poems.
Yeah.
What is next for you?
Um, I am working on another collection of poems where I'm, you know, as you say, I'm thinking more specifically about language and about the language the Rastafari use, you know, as we were talking about, you know, this idea of I and
Yeah.
I man. You know, they have a lot of terms. It's like I man is a pronoun in Rasta poetics.
Oh.
And I asked my brother, you know, when I was writing the book, I was asking them, well, tell me what it means to you, what these words mean to you.
Mm,
You say I man, what does it mean to you? And you know, he said, um, and he had this really beautiful answer about very existential. And he was like, this is my way of sort of affirming myself to the universe and saying I'm here. And I said, oh, well, what if I want to like affirm myself to the universe and say I'm here? Like, what do I say? I don't say I'm man, do I?
right.
And he said, well, no. I said, well, do I say well, he said, actually, I never thought of that about that before. I said, well, do I
Interesting.
Interesting, right? I said, "Do
Yeah.
I say I woman?" He said, "Oh, I think that's so funny. That's so kind of funny to me." And so, if you look in the book, the last chapter is actually called I Woman. And so the poetry collection is actually blooming out of this idea of not just thinking through Rasta dialect and Rasta poetics, um, as this place of linguistic rebellion, this really interesting place of uprooting the English language, but also thinking specifically about inserting a feminine perspective into
Yeah.
a language that might not have imagined a
Yeah, because
woman.
it doesn't sound like it exists when it's just I man.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in thinking through, all the different complexities of what that can do on the page, as
So that's what you're working on right now.
working on that, and I'm also working on a novel. Um,
Can you tell us anything about it?
yeah, it's a historical novel. Is told over 600 years of Jamaican history, beginning with the arrival of Columbus in the early 15th century and the decimation of the native Taino people that he
Mm.
found in Jamaica. And it's told from the perspective of 6 different women in 6 different time periods, right? So starting with
Oh, interesting.
Columbus, starting with Spanish colonization, then British colonization and slavery, starting with, and then the independence movement in the 1960s and 70s for Jamaica. And then it ends in the near future in a seaside village that's under threat of being decimated by climate change. And so,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so because I am the sea child, I'm from the sea, I'm really interested in writing about the oncoming climate threat, which countries in like Jamaica, we have sort of the smallest carbon footprints, but will be among the first affected. And so it's important to me to write about this if I can in everything that I write next. And so yeah, that's sort of the novel will be going through these different movements and periods of history
Do
and futures. Yeah.
when can we expect that out? Or is it
Girl,
too
give me a
early?
chance to write it.
Well, we love this book of yours so much and your writing style. We want to know when we can get more. So we're happy
Uh,
that you're working on it. And thank you so much for taking the time to come to our Meet the Author session. We really, really appreciate it. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.